Hey friends, welcome to the Trinity Happy Hour. I'm James Lee, along with my co-host Kester McCullough. On the podcast, we love to share stories, we love talking about life, and we love exploring the God who is love. Today on the show, we have John Crowder. He's a Christian mystic, a preacher, and an author, and he's here to talk about his new book, Money, Sex, Beer, God. That's right, Money, Sex, Beer, God. This is going to be quite an exciting episode. I can't wait for you to listen to it. Before we go into that, we just have a few notes about what to expect out of this show.
James and I had a great conversation with John, and we're excited to share it with all you guys. We're going to dive right in and talk about dualism, Greek rationalism, Plato's philosophy, and what effect that's had on the church. We talk about ideas of separation between God and man and separation between the spiritual and physical worlds, how that idea didn't come out of Christian or Hebraic thinking, but has somehow crept into the church's thinking for the past couple thousand years. We spend a little while talking about the character and nature of God, our inclusion in Christ and His finished work on the cross, and then we jump into gnosticism, which we'll detail a lot more, but is an early heresy that still has an effect on the way a lot of us who were raised in church think and the way a lot of people view religion in general. We discuss God giving us an appetite for pleasure, and that being a wonderful thing, that our appetite for pleasure isn't shameful or dirty, but it's a gift from God, given by God, to be pleased by God. We follow up with some more specifics on money, sex, and beer, specifically as topics. So we're super excited for you guys to hear this interview, and let's get into it.
Money, Sex, Beer, God. What a title.
Yeah.
And when you add the hashtag element, hashtag Money, Sex, Beer, God, there's going to be some dudes out there who don't use the internet, and they're like, so you get money, then you get sex, beer, and God, and we get to play hashtag? Is that what that's about?
A win-win.
So tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just excited to get it out finally. I mean, I've been working on it for a while. It's something that I've actually taught on for a bit, because the emphasis is just getting people out of these mindsets. Really, when you look at the big picture, I know it's a bit of a scandalous title, but the big picture here is that we've been taught that our spirituality and our natural earthly life are separate, and in the church, in Christianity in general, that's just what's been pawned off, is that the world is evil, and really this goes back to not a Hebraic mindset, but a Greek rationalistic, really Plato. It's a mindset called dualism, where you have this separation between the physical world and the spiritual world. So the whole point here is just to show, hey, God is pro humanity, and he baptized the material world in the incarnation, and these things like money and sex and beer, things that get vilified in the church. I mean, how long have we had vows of poverty and vows of celibacy, and you've got the whole abstinence from all alcohol and the whole temperance movement, and these natural world gifts that God's given have been vilified, when in reality, it's not about cutting them out of our lives. It's an issue of seeing how to filter these things through the Word, and so that's really the gist of the book, and it's just a lot of fun too. I mean, I had a lot of fun writing it. Probably the most I laughed at myself in writing a book, for sure.
I was gonna say, so we haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but we've taken a look at. There's about a 15-minute promotional video that you did that's up on YouTube right now, and people can check that out. And so you talk a lot about the things that you wrote in the book. But since I haven't gotten a chance to read it, I thought I'd ask you if there was like a particular angle or lens that you decided to write the book through. For instance, like your subtitle suggests that there's like this historical and theological element or angle to the book. And then just by way of knowing like who you are as a preacher who's kind of comedic too, which is awesome. Like that's one of my favorite things about you. I figured there'll probably be a pretty good sprinkling of that lighthearted comedy in there as well into the book. But for me, as somebody like, so I go and I see a therapist, a counselor, and I've just gotten a lot of counseling over like the last few years through really good friends and pastors and just people who are just gifted with some kind of encouraging counseling and therapy, right? Because I dealt with all four of those things: the chasing after the money, having sex, drinking a lot of alcohol to the point of alcoholism, and being terrified of this God who I now call Two-Face, actually, and he's flipping a coin. You don't know which side of the coin it's going to land on and which side you're going to get, this God who loves you or this God who's mad at you for what you did today. And so I'm wondering with this book, do you provide that sort of wisdom, that counsel for people such as myself that might be helpful in trying to just, run down the road to freedom from these things? Like, is there that angle in the book?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, with the title, it's actually probably the most pastoral thing that I've ever written.
No kidding.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun, obviously, and I guess you'd get a taste of what it would look like if Crowder was a pastor. These are the topics, it's part of the old subtitle, the scandalous stuff your pastor doesn't want to talk about. So, yeah, so we look at these things. I do take quite a bit of church history. I even show how these Greek dualistic mindsets of separation, which plays right into what you're talking about, this sort of schizo God who is happy some days and wants to fry you in your own fat in the fires of hell the other day. Basically, I show how these dualisms have not just infiltrated the church, but it's a societal thing in the Western world. I even go through the history. I mean, in a light way. Just show some philosophical movements and cultural things that have happened that have just bolstered this idea that God's out there somewhere. Your real life is over here somewhere. And it's because of these partitions that we have in our brains that we separate God out from these real world things that he gives as a gift. And we build these sort of, I don't know, alter egos, or we have problems because instead of enjoying these things in the light of the gospel, in the God-ordained way that he's given us, we tend to break it apart. When in reality, we sort of think that God is against fun. And so the gist of the book is that God is pro-pleasure. He's got no problem with you being loaded. He wants to give you the hottest nookie on the planet. He created alcohol. I mean, he made grapes to ferment. Okay, so the issue is, how do we enjoy these things? Well, he has this ordained way for us to enjoy these things, not because he's a party pooper and he wants to quench our fun, but in reality, he is the life of the party, and he knows what ultimately sustains us. Like the Hollywood idea of hit it and quit it, shallow relationships that just end in brokenness and just horrible things. When in reality, monogamy is God's hottest recipe for sex on the planet, because you're building deeper than just the physical. There's trust involved, and there's this growth and this oneness and depths of vulnerability that otherwise you could never experience. Nothing wrong with booze, but if you drink a gallon of Jack Daniels every day, you're going to end up in the gutter and lose your job, get a divorce. And so there's this whole thing of moderation. But you don't just write off alcohol and say, well, all alcohol is off limits just because I want to be safe, because that never brings safety. I mean, when you cut things off and make these man-made legalisms, what that does is it just causes sin to increase. Now, I'm not saying if you've been in like if you're in AA or you had a problem that it's wrong to pull back from the bottle a bit, but at the end of the day, that AA theology is not going to help you out, because you're not an addict. You need to realize you are a son of God, you are holy, you're free from that old nature, and getting this grounded in us, that's when we're able to enjoy things without sort of superstitiously attributing these powers to the substances themselves. It's really about mindsets, for sure.
I almost want to add too, because that was amazing. I almost want to add too, it's when you start to realize who the true self really is and your identity in Christ, or even just if you're not even a believer, if you just believe that you yourself are a good person, you are loved, you are accepted, you are approved, and you don't define yourself by those things outside of you that you're doing, right? I think you're a dad, right?
4 kids, yeah.
4 kids. Oh, no kidding. What are the
Yeah,
ages?
old man. I've got an 18-year-old in college now.
Oh,
I've
wow.
got I've got a 14-year-old who's sprouting hair all over the place now. I've got a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old. My 10-year-old is massive. I mean, I do think we have some Nephilim blood. I'm 6'5", and my wife is 6 foot. My son, he's 10 years old, and he's already 160 pounds.
Jeez.
There are three UFC weight classes beneath him, and he's 10 years old.
Wait, I think that makes him a middleweight, maybe a light heavy.
he's up there, yeah.
Dude, no kidding. Okay, so the reason I was asking that is because, like, as a father, there has to have been, and I'm glad that you mentioned that the book is written with sort of that pastoral perspective that you're trying to give. Because even as a dad, I would imagine, like, there's an element of that in there as well, of what, how you define yourself, how you define your kids, and how you identify with that relationship, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the identity thing, and that's really been the core of our message for, I don't know how long, is, that we are holy, that we're not sinners, this whole crazy idea of indwelling sin, which, it's just nuts to me that to say that you're in union with Christ and that you're holy and that you're not a sinner is considered heresy today. It's just crazy how far the church has gotten askew into this do-it-yourself, clean yourself up sort of sanctification mindset. And so we actually spend a bit of time on that in the God section, just showing how those same dualisms have influenced our view of ourselves. We have this idea, we got this like our spirit man, spirit, soul, and body. Our spirit man is way out in this untouchable, positionally holy. And then you've got this middle layer of soul, and then your physical material body is way down the ladder. And really, that's not even a biblical concept. Now, I'm not saying you don't have a spirit, soul, and body. Maybe you do, but the Bible never says it. That is actually Plato. That is a carryover from the ancient pagan religion of Neoplatonism, where they felt there was this physical material world that was fallen matter, and then you had layers of ethos, and then way out in the distant beyond is God, intouchable. Like, they didn't call him God, they called him the demiurge or the great good. And we just baptized that whole model into our Christian worldview. And so we think God's out there, then your soul is this dirty sort of middle layer, and then your physical body is evil. And it's just we've broken ourselves apart, and we've really not realized that, Jesus didn't just become a man. John says Jesus became flesh. He became sarx. And he's pro-humanity. The incarnation is a permanent new way of doing business. The cosmos has been totally rewired in the incarnation. There's no separation from God. Our natural physical lives are totally interwoven in the life of God. And so it's not that we have these dirty souls that we have to clean up and overcome all these problems. The issue is really just awakening to the truth of who we've been all along. And really, that's how I define faith. Faith is an awareness. It's an awakening. It's a consciousness of reality. Just because we've just been in delusion about who He is and who we are.
No, it's good. The separation mindset that infected the church that you're talking about is separation, like you said, between the physical and the spiritual, and then separation between us and God. And we have ingrained that into our reading of the Scripture so deeply. We even translate the Scriptures to line up with that. I was reading the other day, someone like the NIV translates one of the passages that we are made holy and blameless in His sight, right? Like, He just looks at us from far away. It's so unrelational. It's so legal and judicial. It's that He looks at us and we're holy, because we're really not holy, right? We're wretched and blameful. So, but we even read the Scriptures in terms of, you don't want to make it too union-y. You got to keep a little separation there. So yes, we're holy and blameless, but only in His sight, only when He's like looking at us. We're not really actually holy and blameless.
That's right. Yeah, such a judicial view, and it's not visceral. It's not real, and it doesn't help anybody out in their real life. When we hear that, we can just do whatever because we're positionally blameless. And in reality, man, we are totally free. We can live an absolutely perfect life. And people are so scared of that word perfection. And part of it's because we've been grilled with this idea of self-righteous, do-it-yourself perfection. And so,
yeah, tell me more about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a both and thing. I mean, we sort of had this idea of imputed righteousness, where God technically, judicially gives us righteousness, but it's not real and tangible and experiential. Now, that is true. He does impute righteousness. We are positionally perfect, but it's more than just imputed. It's tangible, real life, really free from sin in this world. And I mean, to suggest that we're always going to be battling this sinful nature until we die. Well, what you're saying that death is your savior, and you're going to worship death and build a church to death, like so many do. Jesus Christ is our savior. We're totally free from sinfulness. We can live a completely holy life. And I mean, this was a resounding theme in Paul's letters. I mean, Galatians 2:20, I have been, past tense, co-crucified with Jesus Christ. My old nature is gone. Romans 6, for our old self has been crucified with Christ. Colossians, 2, you've died and your life is hidden with Christ. I mean, over and over in every one of his letters, if one died for all died. 2 Corinthians, it's just everywhere. So we've just been told this is a positional reality, but this is a tangible, very mystical, but a real separation from the old fallen nature. And I think it helps some people to understand what that old nature is. It's not like it was this entity in and of itself. As a matter of fact, the scriptures, like you'd mentioned the NIV talking about the old nature, well, that word old nature or sinful nature is not even in the Bible. It's just one of the ways that the term sarx, flesh, is used. Now, in one sense, your body is fine. There's nothing wrong with your body, flesh. But the word sarx is also used in a negative way to imply this old nature, this sort of self-centered nature, whatever. But that was always just a delusion. It's not like it was this separate entity. It was this delusional existence where we covered our eyes and said, "Oh, I can exist apart from God," and it's just fantasy. And that's just been the problem. Is really, and that's why repentance, metanoia, change your mind, is such a big thing in the scriptures, is realizing who he really is, who we are in him, and waking up to the truth.
Yeah. It's like someone saying, trust me, but you're having a problem actually trusting somebody.
Especially do you trust me?
I just met you, John.
But you call this bad neighborhood?
Yeah, when I heard you talking about the book, a lot of it, not to derail too far, I think it ties in. A lot of it comes down to the trust, right? That it would be a non-issue in the church and in our personal lives if we believed that God was for us and was the lover of humanity. If we actually really believed that, and it wouldn't even be a question. When in Titus it says, for the holy all things are holy, we wouldn't bat an eye at that. Or for the pure all things are pure. It's like it would be plain and obvious that the creation our good God created was good and for our pleasure, and that God's restraints and limitations and warnings about how we use and engage with creation would be good and for our pleasure and for our flourishing. But because at really a very deep level, so many struggle with actually believing God is for them or for the human race or for and loves the people that they love, then of course we would wonder why follow this guy's rules in the first place.
Right.
And that seems to lead into two choices, because if God really isn't for humanity, then you probably love people more than that imaginary God does. And so then you have the option of toss out this God's rules and all the other rules and just be, full antinomianism, just none of this matters. Or you think you're clever enough to come up with your own rule set and you become a legalist and you can tell people where the lines and warnings are, because it's hard. I mean, it's hard with the message that's normally preached, especially about what the character and nature of God is like, to really, really believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can trust him, that he has your best interests in mind. Because if God is dangling you over the pit of hell like a spider or some other loathsome thing, it's hard to feel like he has your best interests at heart, right?
Especially if that's what you're being taught.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've been taught that God is just this moralizing, just sort of like a school marm in the sky who is, totally disinterested in you and yet has this looming watchful eye over everything that you do and is just ready for a white glove inspection to, smack you down anytime you do something wrong. And so it's no wonder that we want distance from that and we want some relief from that. And so that's, again, where we develop these little alter egos, but there's no substance in those things. It's not reality. And if we can really trust that he has our best interest in mind, and that's the thing, we get so subjective with our life guidelines, and decide to go our own way in so many different things, because we think that there's just this blanket rule set that can't possibly apply to everybody. But New Testament moral guidelines are things that are given to us that are intrinsically human. And yeah, there's obviously some cultural things in there, but even in that, you can tell the difference between what are cultural things if you really want to dig in context. And it's so easy. People just want to blanket, just take a really shallow look at the scriptures because of this very idea that the scriptures are against our fun. And they said, well, what's the difference between these, irrelevant tattoo regulations in Leviticus versus, banging my girlfriend in the back seat or whatever? And it's like there's a massive difference. And so people don't understand, the difference between, old covenant regulations there are so many of these were ceremonial and have been radically outdated but the scriptures in the New Testament show us these things. I mean, it's really clear. Look, all the food regulations, irrelevant. Okay, nothing wrong with pork, but don't pork your girlfriend. Okay, that's not real love. Okay, there's no honor in that if you're not committed. You haven't even put your wallet on the table, and you're literally taking the holy of holies here in a sacrilegious way, and saying you're not honoring this person. So we have to really. A lot of people just they don't have a basic understanding of just how to rightly divide the scripture. Now, obviously, there's a million different interpretations of scripture, so people kind of use that as a blanket, statement to throw it all out. I'm not saying you got to be a Bible scholar, but there is definitely a difference in realizing new covenant moral guidelines. They're not this legalistic rule book to take away all of our kicks. They're actually, again, like you said, it boils down to the character of God. If he's for us, then he's given us these guidelines because he legitimately cares about us, and he's big enough to know what is a genuine human issue at hand that needs to be dealt with.
That's good, and I think that's part of that last thing you said is a part of why this can be so difficult to talk about, because if God is distant and separate and no one can know his ways, he's so far above us and different that we shouldn't even try, then his rules are arbitrary. He's just this arbitrary moralist. Don't do this. Why? Because I said so. Do this. Why? Because I said so. Like, there's no reason or rhyme, and don't waste your time trying to figure it out. But in the paradigm of our union with God and understanding our, that we as humans are seated with Christ in the heavenlies and that the Lord has indwelled us, then we can see that everything God did, everything Christ did that was for us gives us a paradigm through which to view the law. That the law is not this arbitrary moralism that we have to guess at, but that we can use our rationale, our thinking abilities, the Spirit's revelation inside of us to know how to respond to money. Like, if we're stealing money from people, it's not wrong because God just arbitrarily happened to say theft is wrong. It's wrong because it's hurting someone. Or like you said about sex outside of the confines of marriage. It's not wrong because God just flipped a coin and was like, okay, no sex outside of marriage. And it was just 50-50.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's it.
I like the way this conversation is going because we're not just saying like what we think or believe about money, sex, spirit, God, but we're kind of laying down more of a foundation of identity and built on trusting this God as a person, and not just like, what do you think about money? Well, I think it's good. What do you think about beer? It's all right. So to be perhaps a little bit more specific, like what can you tell us about money, beer, and sex?
Well, I think when we look at church history again, this influx of these dualistic mindsets and the earliest heresy in the church, I mean, besides outright legalism, was Gnosticism.
Okay.
And for folks who are listening that may not be familiar with the term, maybe you've seen the Gnostic book section in your local Barnes and Noble, and you've read the Da Vinci Code or something. But Gnosticism, it really boils down to this whole idea, like we said earlier, of a dualistic split between the spirit and the natural, between the material world and the unseen world. And Gnostics took it a step further, and they said the material, physical world is evil. And this is why they could not stomach the idea that Jesus had a physical body. That would have made him evil. They thought matter itself was a fallen state, that everything was once just all spirit, and then we fell and became physical matter. And there were two ways that this mindset, this sort of negative theology, worked itself out. You had Greek Gnostics. And Greek Gnostics felt that they had to beat up the physical body. And so they were really into asceticism, fasting all the time, vows of poverty. Even though they were married, there was no, paddling the pink canoe. Even though they were married, they would cut off all the hokey pokey. It was crazy. So, and then when it came to vows of poverty, maybe I mentioned that, vows of celibacy, just anything, the physical world was bad. And so, it was anti any physical material pleasure. That was Greek Gnosticism. That's how they dealt with it. Now, there was another form of Gnosticism called Roman Gnosticism. And Roman Gnostics also felt that the physical world was evil, but they took a different approach. They said, hey, you know what? We're all messed up. There's nothing we can do about it. God's going to destroy it all anyways, so let's just have an orgy. So the Roman Gnostics, they said food for the stomach, stomach for the food. God's going to destroy it all, so let's just do whatever we want to do. And that's exactly what Paul is dealing with when he gets into this whole diatribe on sexual immorality in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Mm-hmm. Is he's dealing with that very Gnostic thing that you had in Corinth, which was like Vegas on steroids back in the day. You had these temple prostitution rings that had like thousands of male and female prostitutes. It was just a crazy city of debauchery or whatever. And you had these two forms of Gnosticism at play in the church. So you had married people who, even though they're married, they wouldn't skin the dingo upside down. They wouldn't do anything with their spouse. And then you had other Roman Gnostic influenced believers who would hit anything that moved. And so Paul has to come in and he has to clarify. And that's where we get these passages that have been sort of the fuel behind these I Kiss Dating Goodbye books and all these really doctrines of demons that sort of tell us in the church that marriage or sex is bad, or that marriage is a lesser call than celibacy, that if you really want to be spiritual, you need to sleep in a cold twin bed your entire life, and that there's a higher call. And that's where we get those ideas is from misunderstanding what Paul's shooting for there in that chapter to the Corinthians, where he makes this statement: it's better for a man not to touch a woman, for instance. And I remember when I first read that, I was like, man, am I allowed to give a sister a side hug on Sunday? I mean, is that going to defile her? It's better not to even touch a woman. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, he's not saying touch. He's saying touch that stuff. That's what he's talking about. But the thing is, Paul is not even saying this. These are not Paul's words. Paul is quoting a question that the Corinthians had asked him. And so they were asking a very dumb question, okay? We do a lot of Q&As, and I like to say there's no such thing as a dumb question, but really at the end of the day, every question's a dumb question. If we weren't dumb, we wouldn't ask questions, right? So, but this one was a dumb question. So it's this battle going on between the Greek and Roman Gnostics, and they're trying to find out, is it right or is it wrong to feed the kitty? And what Paul is saying here, he says, look, it depends on whose kitty you're feeding, okay? Don't feed the neighbor's cat. You don't want that thing coming around, okay? So he's saying, look, you guys are totally mixed up on this. You're trying to figure out if it's right or wrong to have sex. He's like, it depends on who you're having it with. And that's why he says it is good for a man to have a wife. It is good for a wife to have a husband. And so this was a very pro-marital union passage that Gnosticism hijacked it and made it seem like God is against sex itself. And right from the early church, you had some of the early church fathers who, God bless them, I mean, they gave us such amazing revelation on the Trinity and the Incarnation, but they were also products of their day to some extent, and they had this Greek Gnostic influence in their minds. And so this is why you had early church fathers who just radically came against sex as an institution itself, even in marriage. Origen lopped his own chicken nuggets off. St. Augustine, was sitting on a park bench one day, sees this fine young lady, walks in front of him, gets a little pup tent under his tunic, throws himself into a cold lake, renounces his entire secular life, and becomes a monk. And some would consider that an overreaction. But
Wow.
but this was like how it rolled back then. Jerome, who is the translator of the Vulgate Bible, and Ambrose both taught that marriage is bad. Marriage itself is bad. They said that marriage was just a little less evil than fornication. And once Christians were married, they were expected to no longer visit the love couch. It was just high and dry from there on out. I mean, that is what was taught. And so by like the 4th century, you couldn't even be a priest. You couldn't be a professionally religious guy unless you had, vowed a vow of celibacy. And so in the Catholic Church, man, that stuff continued up into the Middle Ages, where you had over half of the calendar days a year, every Catholic was expected to fast from sex. So many days during Lent, so many days before Easter, before you have communion, blah, blah, blah. It was just crazy. So, and then look at the Victorian era. I mean, my God, crazy. In the Victoria era, they're literally covering the piano legs because they look too seductive. But at the same time, you had 10,000 prostitutes working the streets of London. And so this is exactly the point we're making, is when you draw these lines of really ungodly legalism. These aren't even biblical legalisms, but by saying that sex is bad even in marriage. Well, what's going to happen is people are going to get their fix somewhere, and that's where it just causes sin to increase, not to justify the prostitution ring there, but I'm just saying there's no wonder that the things going on. And so these things go hand in hand. The legalisms and these Gnostic, like, anti-material things, even though they're presenting this guise, this form of godliness, they actually cause sin to increase. And so, Jesus warned of 2 types of leaven: the leaven of the Pharisees, which is like this religious thing, and the leaven of Herod, which is just outright worldliness. But really, these aren't 2 different things. They're it's just the twin towers of evil here that we're dealing with. And so religious abstinence never helped anybody out. It only causes problems. The deal is we gotta really go back to the Word, see what the God-given outlet is for these things.
It's interesting that divide has existed so regularly throughout history, right? Between total licentiousness and unreserved asceticism, and then the total monastic revocation of all pleasures. And it seems to exist today, and I find it in myself, and I find it in people around me, that why is it so hard to find that middle ground? It's so easy to either just go all out and let everything fly, or do nothing and create a system of rigors and regulations for yourselves. That middle ground seems so incredibly difficult and so fleeting that so few find that you're either going to go one way or the other. And a lot of us go both ways depending on what season of life we're in, right? Why do you think that is so difficult to settle on?
Well, I think it's one of those things that sometimes the answer is just so easy in plain sight. I think because on the one hand, it's for a lot of people, a book like this would just seem like common sense. I think even a lot of people who they're not Christians, but they want still some type of just genuine moral framework in their life. I mean, most people are not just looking to be alcoholics or just rampant unfettered sexual appetites. I think that what we're talking about is something that is intrinsically human. But what happens is we're all craving a fix. At the end of the day, we are all, built in with this God-given appetite for pleasure, this God-shaped hole in our heart. And so, religion has told us that your appetite for pleasure is somehow wrong, that your appetite for pleasure is equivalent to the sinful nature. But you see, God made us with this appetite. But it's made to ultimately be satiated on Him. And so the sinful nature was actually the thing that caused us to look for pleasure outside of God. And so when He's at the center, when we know that He's the ultimate fulfillment, that He's the only one that really scratches our infinite itch. I mean, we were made, He made Adam and Eve, He put them in a garden called Eden, which means pleasure. We're created for divine pleasure.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
So, yeah, I think when we're feasting on Him, when He is our ultimate source, then we're less prone to go astray with other things. We can enjoy this life in a holistic, balanced, moderate way, which is exactly what He intended. So religious people, I mean, they see others, ungodly heathen chasing after pleasure. And so they think the appetite for pleasure is wrong. But you see, it's like noses. Everybody's got a nose. Unbelievers have noses. That doesn't mean they're wrong just because unbelievers have them. Let's chop our noses off. Well, look, just because unbelievers are chasing after pleasure doesn't mean that our need for pleasure is somehow wrong. It's just an issue of focusing it in the right place. See, that sinful nature caused us to look for pleasure outside of God. But when we're satisfied in Him, man, you lose your taste for going overboard in areas that are, there's a change from the inside out. It's not just external regulations, and that's how a lot of people look at even New Testament moral guidelines. No, there's this internal transformation where where your bread is buttered. Ultimately where your bliss, where your ecstasy is found, and so you can enjoy this life, but you're not gonna go overboard with things in an ungodly way.
Right. I often use the perspective, like when I'm thinking about my moral conscience in day-to-day decisions that I need to make that involve like my well-being or the well-being of others around me. A perspective that I've tried to use. Now, I'm not married. I don't have any kids or whatever, but a perspective that I try to use is that perspective of being a parent and thinking about what I would say to my kids or how I would instruct them to live if they were thinking or doing things the way that I currently am. So for most of my life, for however many years, there was a lot of days where I tell myself, like, I am what I did. I'm literally identified as guilty or shameful for doing what I've done, right? But if my own son or daughter came up to me and said those things, I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, you're my kid. You're not those things. So just be who you are, my child. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's, I think what the gospel really does in this revelation of the finished work of the cross and your new identity, the truth of your identity is He's always known it to be. What it does, I think it changes how you deal with others, changes your parenting, just like you're saying here. I mean, with our kids, we don't say, oh, you naughty idiot, like what you just did. We say, hey, you're a good boy. Some do,
right? But yeah, we're not saying that that's good.
Right. Yeah. So we say, look, hey, you're a good boy. Now, that's you're better than that. That's not how you act. That's not the truth of who you are. And then that's just grounded in them. Every time there's a negative action, we approach it from a place of identity, and that's just something that we've sort of built a habit pattern of doing. And I can honestly say that in the years since we've really been flowing in the message, man, it's just so much easier being a parent. I mean, the kids just don't act out as much. mean, I can't remember the last time I had to really like seriously discipline a kid. It's just, I mean, it is crazy how the truth really does set us free.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, John,
Yeah.
I have the feeling people are going to see your book, and along with all other criticisms that get levied at you, they're going to say, I told you he was a prosperity preacher. Jesus never said it would be easy. You got to pick up your cross. Have they been listening to what he's been
saying this whole time, though?
Well, right, probably not. No, probably not. Yeah. But you got to, you got to pick up your cross. You got to die. He didn't say it would be easy, and he didn't say it would be fun. And now John's trying to sell you on the gospel of pleasure and love of the world,
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure I'll be labeled a prosperity preaching alcoholic pervert or something after this one. I've never failed to give fodder to the critics. I try to give them a little low-hanging fruit in hopes that a few of them will actually dig in and see what I'm saying there.
Yeah. Do you think there is a place? I mean, Martin Luther talks about our daily mortification and vivification that we participate in with Christ, that we do face, whether by chance, by our own choices, or by the nature of the world we live in, we do face great suffering, or we have friends that are suffering greatly. And part of our call and part of our life is to enter into suffering with people, and that suffering is a process for ourselves that grows us. Do you see an intersection with, the joy of creation and the pure pleasures of the created world, along with the suffering, the picking up of the cross, the daily dying and living, the participating in the victory of Jesus and the sufferings of Jesus?
Yeah. It's that's obviously a really big mindset in the church, isn't it? And so I think that really you have to take it back and look at how that train of thought pans out. At the end of the day, we so many believers who actually think God gives us suffering in order to mature us or whatever. And man, how twisted does that end up becoming? I mean, that's like, you're basically worshiping Diablos there. I mean, you're blaming God for stuff that's a result of the devil or the fall or whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, if you take this hyper view of sovereignty, like a lot of the Calvinists do, I mean, you're blaming God for the kids starving in Somalia. You're blaming God for the preteen girl who gets raped on the playground. I mean, it's just absolutely sick and disgusting. And so here's the thing: at the end of the day, this really is good news. It's not partially or potentially good news. At the end of the day, man, I know there's suffering out there. I'm not delusional. I've checked my CNN app for the day. I know there's war in Ukraine and Syria. There's a lot of problems in the world, but there are two different ways that we can look at this. We can see those problems, or we can look through a lens of the finished work of the cross, and we can see a redeemed humanity that doesn't even realize it yet. And so I'm not saying that sufferings and problems don't happen, but at the end of the day, man, the gospel has absolutely nothing to do with our suffering and sorrow. What the gospel is, it is joy unspeakable in the midst of our suffering and sorrow. It's the very thing that pulls us through every dark night, through every Red Sea, through every difficult season. Because at the end of the day, we're either going to blame God for being the bringer of evil, or we can see him as the redeemer from evil. And so this is a different mindset altogether. It's a positive mindset of seeing him and his victory, his finished work, not proclaiming that we've been inducted into a war zone, but the gospel is the proclamation of a victory that's taken place. And all around us, we do see suffering people, and we do enter into those. But the thing is, we weep with those who weep, not just to have a ball fest, but we do that in order to meet them where they are, and then turn their face upward to hear the good news, to turn their frowny face into a brownie face, and to bring joy. Because at the end of the day, man, depression is not a fruit of the Spirit. Joy is a fruit of the Spirit. But this whole idea, that suffering is somehow this virtue in and of itself is absolutely foreign to the gospel, and it's quite unfortunate, and I think that it is a result of years of just maligning the character of God. Even this idea of killing ourselves off, like you mentioned, dying daily. I mean, so many of these things, just you put these in context of what the scriptures say. You know, Luther, I mean, God bless Luther. I love Luther, huge hero of mine. But in terms of this idea of indwelling sin, man, the guy didn't take the Reformation far enough. You know, he thought he was always going to be a sinner and everything he did was a sin. Come on, man, get the gospel in you, Luther. Let's step this thing up a bit. He didn't just cover your sins. He eradicated sinfulness itself. You are perfect.
Perhaps he was too angry all the time.
Yeah,
Luther did talk about the pile of horse shit with the white blanket over it, right? I mean, that was his image.
Oh, absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
Jesus.
No, yeah, we don't read Luther for identity issues. We read Luther to realize that we're not saved by the law. That's what Luther's good for. You gotta look at each guy for his strengths. Also, Luther was great at sarcasm and blatant criticism. He was just a funny guy, and he liked a lot of beer as well.
He could throw back a pint or two. Yeah.
But this whole mortification thing, I mean, you know, mortify your flesh. Well, man, what translation has used that since 1611? The verse right before says you've died and your life is hidden with Christ. So Paul's not saying you died, so kill yourself. That's why every translation it says you've died, so therefore consider yourself dead. So I think in these times where, you know, there are times where we lay certain things down, let go of certain things, but I don't see that as like a death to self thing. I just don't like that terminology. I just don't think that's biblical terminology. I think what it is in those moments, we're waking up to the truth of who we really are, and acting accordingly. You know, when Paul talked about I die daily, I mean, look at that verse in context, i.e. read the entire verse. He said, I face danger every hour. He's talking about persecution. Jesus, I've been shipwrecked, spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been beaten by the Jews, beaten by the Gentiles, stoned multiple times. I'm in danger in the country, in danger in the city, in danger from false brothers, in danger from bandits. Like everywhere he goes, he's literally facing death, facing persecution all the time. And it's not that Paul just had this gung-ho, you know, willpower, grit your teeth and bear it. Like, we think Paul was like a Marine. No, man, I'm telling you what, Paul was smoking something. Paul was hammered, intoxicated on this glorious good news that he had been given an inheritance. You don't work for an inheritance. It's a gift. He had been given something that he never could have achieved in his own striving religious efforts. And now he's like the Energizer Bunny. They beat him down and he just keeps on ticking. They stone the guy. He gets up and finishes his sermon. I mean, he is running to the hilt, infused with this power of the gospel. He's just got to give it away. Yeah. Woe to me if I don't preach the gospel. Radically different thing. So it's not like Paul is somehow adding to the sufferings of Christ. There's another mistranslated verse. He was adding really to our revelation of what Christ had done, waking us up to the truth of, man, it really is finished. Jesus pulled something off. And unfortunately, man, how we have detracted from the glory of Christ by literally spitting on the cross, saying, Jesus, that wasn't enough. You need my sufferings, my afflictions to help you out, to help out my spirituality, to cause myself to spiritually grow. And yeah, we grow. Absolutely, but Christian growth is not about killing off an old nature that's clearly already dead. Christian growth is really a positive thing. It's waking up to the goodness that's already in us.
You know, that's been part of my journey, is like not to try so hard to be better, but just be okay with who I am today. And know that, like, the hope of the gospel is that the Spirit's constantly working on me to grow me.
Absolutely.
And it kind of takes the weight off my shoulders quite a bit. The more I remember when I first considered that thought, and I was like, I'm okay just to be me today, you know?
Yeah.
And if that includes, like, the good and the bad, then so be it. I'll try to do as least damage as possible to myself and others.
Yeah.
But it's a relief to not have to, like, play that sort of facade or ego of being this perfect follower of Jesus all the time.
Yeah. It's not ultimately on our shoulders. That's true.
I love what you said about suffering, John, that we meet people in their suffering, but it's no good to save someone drowning by going and just drowning with them. And it's also no good to float them over a list of ways to swim in the future so they don't fuck it up next time. But
I think for so long the church has been trying to throw a life raft to the drowning, but Jesus didn't throw us a life raft. What he did is he dove in and he pulled us up onto the deck already, and now we're waking them up from the PTSD of their ridiculous false existence, saying, "Hey, dude, you are totally home free thanks to Jesus. You're not potentially home free if you pull yourself in up the rope. No, you are home free. He pulled it off. He's the one who did it, and that's the good news. Absolutely."
Yeah. And then, I don't know, that you could wake up to that reality of your inclusion in the shared life of the Father, Son, and Spirit and think you need to come up with some rules for yourself. But, maybe a lot of that just comes from the church and teaching. And if you grow up being told, do not taste, do not touch, then you just assume that's what God wants. I mean, maybe it's just people getting back to reading the Word, because, my goodness, you could not read too many pages in the New Testament and want to keep following all these rules and regulations you made for yourself. I mean,
yeah, you'd be crazy to think you could actually do it all.
Yeah, Paul even calls those who want to abstain from foods and don't want to do this or that the weaker brother. Like, it's a crutch. I mean,
the whole fasting movement stuff, all of that. Yeah, it's a crutch. It's really a lack of faith. That's what Paul's talking about there.
Yeah.
And we bear with them. Obviously, he says, bear with these guys. But so often we think of the weaker brother as the guy who's just coming off a coke addiction or something. Right. But really, Paul's actually gearing this towards like Pharisaical type of people who were trusting in their own efforts, and their faith wasn't strong to rest in the finished work of the cross.
Right.
So I get handed a lot of books. I hand people a lot of books, and now you're going to hand me your book, which I'll pay for through your website.
No, we'll gladly send you one.
And then I'm going to hand that book to other people, and yet another book out in the, the stratosphere of so many books in this world.
Yeah.
But what I'm meaning to say here is, like, sometimes I think like the last thing I want from another book is someone just simply spouting a bunch of information.
Yeah.
Because sometimes for me that suggests that they simply know more than me, but that the information isn't going to necessarily be freeing to me. But what I've been hearing from you during the last hour or so is a lot of stuff that can be freeing. That includes historical facts and context, biblical facts and context, the theology of it, as well as bringing our own experiences into this as well. And so I think when someone shares an experience with me, then comes like a lot of that wisdom, just like you've been doing for this last hour. And it kind of says, like, to me, from that person, I know what you're going through, rather than, well, let me tell you how to get out of that pit. So I'm going to assume there was something about writing this that came from some personal experiences that you had. And if that's the case, what do you say to potential readers to sort of just give them a hand and lead them to read your book?
Yeah. I think this. And I have written books that are more just only theologically oriented. This is definitely one that I think is very practical for people. These are real life issues that we generally are not. We're not really given a lot of healthy revelation on. They tend to come at us from legalistic viewpoints or whatever. So. And I think in terms of from a personal angle, I actually did put quite a bit of testimony in there, from some of our own journey in terms of like the money stuff, some of my testimony from dealing with alcohol, substance abuse in my own past. I didn't give too much of my own personal testimony in the sex part. I didn't think that my wife would appreciate that very much, but but it is a very, very practical section and a lot of fun. And I think just for the entertainment value itself, it's probably worth the read. But yeah, I think in today's climate, with there being so much talk on sexuality and gender confusion, that's a huge thing, and homosexuality and things like that. And I think it is good to look at the scriptures from a place that's not that's not condemning or legalistic or whatever, but it is validating the Scripture as inspired and having a role in our lives, and how we look at that stuff from a place of identity. I think it's a really practical book. I mean, I potentially tipped quite a few sacred cows in here. I'm sure that the backlash will be glorious.
It's interesting. So in talking about the sexuality thing, do you come down to a agree to disagree kind of stand on that? Because it is such a hot topic issue all across America.
Right. Well, it's not really, I'm not really like doing a flip a coin for or against any particular thing. I'm really just, I'm just looking at an identity issue here. And I spent a bit of time in that. That one is a bit of a can of worms to dive into within a couple minutes. It's like hell, the topic of hell. You can't talk about that for 2 minutes and then without making somebody angry. But no, I look at the whole issue of what did Paul have to say about these things, and I just briefly touched on a few little points, but that wasn't a main focus in the book. I actually talked a bit on dating in there as well. I mean, it's hard to touch on the topic of sex without covering a broad range of issues. Mm-hmm. And you tend to get, and here's a great Luther quote, is you get in trouble not for what you say, but for what you don't say. And so I just knew that whatever I say about sex...
You get in trouble for a lot of things you do say.
I was going to say, that quote doesn't quite...
But, whatever you say about sex, I mean, somebody, you could just give a laundry list of stuff you should or shouldn't do, mm-hmm. but somebody's still going to find a loophole in there that's not on the list to get their rocks off somehow illicitly. So so what I did is I do cover quite, some pretty point blank, take the gloves off and really just, I'm really clear about stuff. There is clarity. Don't get me wrong. But it's, the thing, let me just back this up for a second, fellas. The thing is with Paul's letters, for instance, like we have this idea that Paul gives us these moral codes. And if we do these certain things, then we become holy. And that's totally backward of what Paul was doing. And that's a total religious way of looking at things, anti-gospel, anti-Christ way of looking at things. Paul wasn't giving us a new law. Paul, who was the grace apostle, spent an enormous time talking about morality. Now, a lot of people, when they get hold of grace, they don't want to talk about morality anymore. They're afraid that's going to make them a legalist, or they're mixing law with grace. But here's Paul mm-hmm. spending an enormous amount of time talking about morality. Now, so the issue is we have to look at it the right way. He didn't say do these things so that you become holy. He always puts the identity first. He puts the be before the do. He puts the indicative before the imperative. He says you are holy. And since you're a good boy, therefore act like it. You're a good boy, right? Now, does a good boy sleep with the temple prostitutes? No. So this is Paul's moral formula. And when we get that, man, then we can really stomach these things. So as we're looking at these things in the right context, and we don't just see this list of do's and do nots coming down on us, we realize, okay, wow, I am discovering the glory of how a new creation should act. It's not performance-based. It's not that my identity is at stake here. Rather, these are what the outflow of a wholly new identity looks like.
Lightning round?
Yeah. All right. Doing a lightning round real quick. I'll name off the different topics of the book. And then just the first thing that comes to mind, 1 or 2 sentences on it. Just real quick. So, are you ready?
I am as ready as I'm going to be.
Wait. Is this the one with the impressions?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. Money.
Wonderful. Lots of it.
Lots of it.
Now, in the lightning round, let's clarify the rules of the lightning round here.
Whoa, this isn't about rules. This is about relationship, John. Have you not listened to this whole past hour?
Okay. We already accepted your answer. Okay.
No, we can clarify the rules.
Okay. Money. You can visit thenewmystics.com/partners. There you go.
That's the site where you guys give us the money, right?
That's right. We give you the spiritual blessing.
Okay. Sex.
Spelunking the bat cave. I'm telling you, there's nothing like it. Get hitched.
Okay.
Glorious.
Beer.
My goodness. I live in Portland, Oregon. We're the beer mecca of the United States of America. But I also am trying to trim down my midsection here. So,
not trimming that beard though.
No, the beard's a little out of control. Overcompensating for the head here.
And finally, God.
Whew, God, yes. Incarnation, glory. That's what we're made for. Union, oneness.
I love those
Amen.
words.
And amen.
Okay, so we talked before the show started recording about doing some impressions and reading Bible verses, and just thinking of like Bible verses off the top of my head.
Okay.
So maybe we can go John chapter 1. Let's just do verses out of John chapter 1 or something. But we can all just do one. Why are you sitting there like not being a part? Come in, participate.
I'm participating. I've been included.
Who wants to start? Should we flip a coin?
Man, you act like I got John 1 memorized after the first sentence.
I actually do. I'm going to probably be name dropping here, but I actually do a pretty good Baxter Kruger. You know Baxter, right?
I do know Baxter, yeah.
Oh, you got to hear his Baxter.
Dude, we
are, hate to pop a shameless plug here, but we have a ministry cruise that we're doing in the Caribbean in February with Baxter Kruger and Steve McVeigh. So we're going to be doing that. If anybody wants to join us and sail the high seas for 7 days, just shoot us an email.
Yeah, I have no doubt that's going to be awesome. I think a couple people from our church went on that last year, the year before, and it was like
nice.
Excellent.
Yeah, this is the first year I've done one. We started doing the religious detox cruises a few years ago, and I haven't done one in probably 4 years, but some other guys did them. And so this is the first year I'm back on the boat. Should be a lot of fun. I think we already have like 60 people signed up for the thing. It's crazy. Kidding. So it'll blow up. Yeah.
Yeah, join us for the religious detox cruise. Your host, Dr. C. Baxter Kruger, John Crowder. Maybe we'll get John Piper in there too. Who knows? The spirit is willing,
but the flesh is so damn weak.
Feels like I'm covered in 1,000 damnable cockroaches. Don't worry, we'll be seeing him next month.
You should edit that out.
He'd be cool with it.
He said that in private at a retreat once. He said,
he'd be cool with it.
I feel like I'm covered in 1,000 damnable cockroaches.
So this is, so when I think of John the Baptist seeing Jesus coming across the way, and he's telling his disciples that he's coming there, I had this thought of like Richard Simmons playing the part of John the Baptist. Behold, the Lamb of God comes to take away the sin of the world. You see it in the movies. He's constantly like yelling, like "Behold!"
Oh my gosh!
Or when the who is it? Andrew and John, when they it was John the Baptist disciples. They start going after Jesus in like John 1 or John 2, and they start to approach him. He turns around, and I think of Chinese takeout order Jesus. Like, hello, how may I help you? All right, you had that Southern Baptist preacher.
Well, you know, James, I actually worked in a Chinese restaurant when I was in college. I was a translator.
Oh, nice. Wait, did you speak Chinese?
No.
Or you just reset it slowly in English?
I translated fast English to slow English. So somebody would walk in, they would order Kung Pao chicken, and I would say, Kung Pao chicken. And the chef would go, okay, you can make it. So, yeah.
I've been a translator all of my life for my mom and dad.
It's amazing.
Your mom did call me once looking for you.
I got a few years on you, John.
She said, hello, this is James' mommy. Hello.
Maybe the impression thing isn't going so well, but that's okay. We could X this part out.
I could do it. So you wanted me to do my Jimmy Swaggart.
Jimmy Swaggart. Oh, yes.
Okay, and you want me to read a little from John chapter 1 here?
That'd be great.
Well, I have to put my Jimmy Swaggart glasses on. Okay, and then let's see here. I'm probably going to have to get John chapter 1 a little closer here because I'm blind as a bat with these glasses. Let me go. All right. Should be pretty easy. But now I should know John chapter 1, but I specifically want to give you this in the King James because, I mean, what other translation would Jimmy Swaggart use?
1611, right?
James, 1611.
Okay,
here we go. God. All right, here we go. Massive font. I think we're ready. I'm bumping the font up.
Can you go a little cross-eyed for us? Just to see what that looks like?
My God. Hallelujah. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him. And without Him was not anything made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shineth in the darkness.
Shineth. Amazing.
That's enough Jimmy for one day.
Amazing.
Get out of control.
Amazing.
Do you have plans to release an audiobook of the Old Testament in that voice? Because I would listen to that while I fall asleep. My wife probably wouldn't appreciate it, but I would.
That would be an entertaining idea and possibly a lucrative one.
Right.
You know, if this whole money, sex, beer, God thing doesn't pick up, I mean...
Yeah.
There's always, Leviticus with Jimmy. Yeah.
Before we head out here, you got any plugs that you want to do?
Well, yeah, I mean, if folks do want to pick the book up, moneysexbeergod.com, our store, our online store, johncrowder.net, and we have audio teachings and things they can download on there. Or if that's too difficult to remember, johncrowder.net, there's also moneysexbeergod.com. And we'd love for guys. The book is literally almost here. I mean, our printer hopefully shipped out today, so they should be shipping out next week. All the pre-orders, folks can get that if depending on when you hear the podcast here. The book may already be in our hands. And our main website, thenewmystics.com. Always got lots of fun stuff. Mission trips you can join us on. We have one coming to the Philippines and Indonesia. We're going to do 2 countries in November this year. It's going to be a blast. And going to the lepers and the garbage dumps. And, just always a crazy time when we head over there. So, visit thenewmystics.com. We're also obviously on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the right places. And follow us on there. Connect with us. Let's hang out somewhere. And, hey, if you're on the East Coast, also, you guys are there in Virginia. We're not going to be back in Virginia anytime real soon. I'd like to get back my good friend who's got a wonderful name, Scott Crowder. He's out in Newport News. I'd like to get back out and see him sometime. But we are going to be in Nashville, Tennessee. Don't know how close that is to you guys. Nashville and in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Both of those spots will be on our Gospel Mania tour coming up this fall. Can find all that at thenewmystics.com. We've got a few other East Coast stops, Boston and Chicago, which is not really the East Coast, but it's on the East Coast tour. So, there you go. Come join us somewhere. Have some fun.
Right on. Appreciate you being on the podcast today. Hopefully we can have you back sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate
thank you.
Lots of fun.
Money, Sex, Beer, God, Ditching Religion for the Joy of Incarnation by John Crowder. That's it for the show this week. We hope you guys really enjoyed it. Once again, that was John Crowder, and you can find him at johncrowder.net and also at thenewmystics.com. His book is available to order now, and you can buy the book Money, Sex, Beer, God at moneysexbeergod.com. Use the hashtag MoneySexBeerGod to help John get the book out over social media. Tell your friends about it. I think this book is going to be really great, very freeing for those who perhaps struggle with any of those issues. But also, if you're just looking to learn more about the history, the cultural context, as well as the biblical context for these issues, this is a great book for you as well.
God is great, isn't he? Giving us all these wonderful gifts and a desire for pleasure as part of who we are. We hope you guys have as much fun listening to this as we have with these conversations, because it's a blast for us. So thanks for tuning in. We hope the show is encouraging, enlightening, and maybe even liberates you a little. Check us out on the trinityhappyhour.com. We're on Facebook at the Trinity Happy Hour, and Twitter, Instagram, all that other good stuff. While you're at the website, we'd love it if you signed up for our mailing list. We're not going to spam you or anything, but that's how we send out news and announcements. And there'll also be links to where new shows are when they get posted. I probably don't need to tell you how to find the podcast if you're listening to it, but if you're looking for us, we're on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and all the other major podcast directories. On iTunes and Stitcher, we would love it if you guys would rate and review the show. Those ratings and reviews mean so much to us, and they help us get visibility in the store. So please, please, please go on there. Put a little 5-star rating on there, 4-star if you're feeling greedy, and tell us how you like the show. Also, share the show with anybody you think would enjoy it. Friends, family, a church, people who aren't Christian. I don't know. Just share the show with anybody you think you would have a blast having this conversation with us. And lastly, please feel free to get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. Email us, Facebook us. We would love for you to reach out if there's any topics you'd like us to cover. So thanks again for tuning in, y'all. You guys are what makes the show worth it. Peace.